I'm Alan Spears with Occupy Democrats, and in some breaking news, Senator Bernie Sanders and U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, issued a stunning response to Kamala Harris officially tapping Tim Walz as her running mate. Now, over the past few days, we have seen Republicans scrambling to try to find any semblance of dirt or skeletons in the closet of Harris. Frankly, most of the criticisms that Republicans levy against Harris ultimately boil down to either she has a weird laugh, she is a woman, or she is or isn't black, or some kind of combination of those three. It is quite frankly hilarious to watch these Republicans scramble and panic as they watch their guy, Donald Trump, who just a few weeks ago was pretty heavily favored to win the election, absolutely plummet in the polls. This isn't too surprising, however, as many Americans and many of the undecided or independent voters were simply just not interested in either President Biden or Donald Trump and were desperate for a third option. While they're of course more than simply the Democratic or Republican parties, rarely do the other third parties get more than 1 or 2% of the vote, and there is absolutely a perceived notion that you are wasting your vote if you don't vote for either Democrat or Republican. But with the news that President Biden is no longer seeking re-election, and with Harris stepping up to the plate, as it were, and uniting the Democrats truly in a solid wall against Donald Trump, all that was left to be seen was who she would pick as her running mate. And of course, as we have just learned over the past few hours, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has been tapped as Harris's running mate. Now, while all of the potential running mates were solid choices, Walz might be the strongest out of the lot, as not only has he been an advocate for such things as women's healthcare rights and reproductive rights, as well as access to feminine hygiene products, he was also a fairly moderate Democrat who also enjoys guns and hunting. The Republican attempts to paint Walz as this extreme far-left progressive is just a blatant lie, which of course isn't surprising, but we have photos and video evidence of Walz out in the fields hunting with his guns and his dogs, and isn't that the sort of thing that all conservatives really love? Now, Harris has done wonders to really unite the Democratic Party, as well as restore a sense of optimism and hope and even joy amongst Democrats as well as the rest of the country. This is absolutely reflected in the fact that she is now leading in every major poll against Donald Trump. That is fantastic news. But of course, a major deciding factor in truly uniting 100% of Democrats behind her is who she is going to pick as her running mate, which brings us to our breaking story today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Senators Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, issued their response and their thoughts to Harris tapping Walz as the running mate. Now, it is no secret at all that Sanders and AOC are some of, if not the most left-leaning of the Democrats in Congress, and that they do have an incredibly dedicated and vocal support base. And previously, we had received a bit of mixed messaging as to whether or not AOC and Sanders would fully throw their weight behind Harris, as it would greatly depend on who she chose as her running mate, which now that we have this information, we know definitively in this breaking news that both AOC and Bernie Sanders have fully supported and endorsed Tim Walz along with Kamala Harris for the Democratic ticket. In a post on Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it, AOC stated, "Vice President Harris made an excellent decision in Governor Walz as her running mate. Together, we will govern effectively, inclusively, and boldly for the American people. They won't back down under tight odds either, from healthcare to school lunch. Let's do this." Additionally, Sanders posted earlier today, "Tim Walz is a great asset to Kamala Harris's winning campaign and administration. He is a former public school teacher, a football coach, and strong union supporter. As governor, he delivered for working families in Minnesota. As VP, he will deliver for the working families of the U.S." Now, there were some concerns that AOC and Sanders might not fully get behind Walz as Harris's running mate, as he is a fairly moderate Democrat, and both AOC and Sanders are, as I said earlier, pretty well known to be further on the left. But as we can clearly see, Harris knew what she was doing. She took her time with announcing who her running mate would be, spent multiple days interviewing and getting to know each of the potential vice presidential candidates, and we have our decision now, and it is honestly such a relief and exciting. And despite Republicans' best efforts to try to paint Walz as this far left progressive or liberal. The truth of the matter is he's not. He's far from it. In fact, AOC and Sanders weren't the only ones to weigh in on this pick, as Nancy Pelosi posted on Twitter as well, stating, "Tim Walz is wonderful. He served in the House. To characterize him as left is so unreal. He's right down the middle. He's a heartland of America Democrat, and as chair of our Veterans Affairs Committee, made tremendous gains for our veterans. Hashtag Harris Walz is a winning ticket." It really does seem that the gloom and doom and misery that Donald Trump and Republicans have been peddling for years now is starting to wear thin on the minds of Americans, and that we are getting tired of constantly having to deal with this demagogue and desperate for a candidate who can present a message of hope and joy and belief that this country is already great. With less than 100 days until the election in November, Harris and Walz certainly have their work cut out for them, as they really did get a bit of a late start to the campaigning process. However, again, if the polls are any indicator, Americans are ready, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well, that are sick and tired and fed up with Donald Trump and his constant lying. And when you consider that you have both moderate Republicans and the far left Democrats like AOC and Sanders uniting and coming together to support and endorse Harris and Walz, that to me is super indicative of the fact that these two are going to absolutely crush it come this November. But as always, it does not matter what the polls might say one way or another. It does not matter who endorses who. It really does ultimately come down to your vote. So make sure that you register to vote if you haven't already. And if you are registered, make sure you show up at the polls Tuesday, November 5th to cast your vote and make your voice heard.